Hey, and we're back with the MMA Prospectus. I'm joined once again by my lovely co-hosts, Tom Grant of Bloody Elbow and Patrick Wyman of SureDog.com. And we are here to talk about prospects, prospect development, sports, basically anything that's not drama and bullshit and all the other stuff that gets into the MMA news feed if we can possibly help it. Which is why I want to start off this week's show talking about Bellator and Kimbo Slice. Who's excited for that?
I have like a weird morbid curiosity with this fight just because like I want to know if there's enough bubble gum and paper clips in the world to keep Ken Shamrock together long enough to take Kimbo down and knee bar him.
There's not.
No, they're fine.
No, this
He's crossed into that Joe Riggs territory where like attempting a takedown will probably like cause a self-inflicted.
crossed into. He lives in
Yeah,
that
he lives there.
territory.
Yeah,
I mean, he's been living there for a decade.
an attempted takedown will likely result in a self-inflicted injury in the end of the fight.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and quote Jordan Breen, my boss, on this, and say that Kimbo Shamrock is a joke of the cruelest and most epic proportions. Like that's how I feel about it. I will watch, obviously.
Oh yeah, God no. I mean,
But I will. But like, yeah, I'm not happy about this. Like, like if you feel any sort of joy at the prospect of this fight, you're a cruel person, and you should probably come to terms with that sooner rather than later.
yeah, I think I'm kind of a cruel person because honestly, like, I'm looking forward to it in the same way that I don't know, like I just can't help myself but be like I was kind of struck dumb by how much analysis a lot of people are giving it and like how into it people are getting. And to me, it's just like it. Look, I'm interested in this fight, but in the same way that like I would be interested in a fight in the parking lot outside the nursing home, like
Oh, for sure.
I would watch and I would even maybe enjoy myself and hate that, but I'm not gonna like break it down for people.
No, I mean, would watch. Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think there's something to be said about the notion that there is something inherently cruel about watching combat sports in general, like because at the end of the day, you are taking some pleasure in somebody else's pain, literally.
Yeah.
Like you are deriving entertainment value from that. So, I mean, I'm not saying that is a knock. I'm saying that if you watch combat sports already, you've got a little bit of that in you. And I mean, so on that note. What do you think of this bristling young heavyweight prospect, Kimbo Slice?
Oh, I think in today's heavyweight division, I mean, we could be looking at a top five guy within the next couple of years. You know, he's only got 6 fights. He's only got 6 fights. He's only lost to, his only recent loss is to legit competition in Matt Mitrione. I mean, we've seen what Matt Mitrione has done. So I think we can say that, Kimbo's a guy on the rise, and given the way the heavyweight division shakes out, he could win any kind of fight right now. Throw him in there with Andrei Arlovsky. I'm ready.
See, my favorite thing is when Kimbo fought Houston Alexander. One of my friends had a huge bet on Houston Alexander. Like, well, Houston Alexander has fought and beaten legitimate fighters. Kimbo Slice is a joke. This was his exact reasoning. Not incorrect, like not necessarily incorrect reasoning. If we're being honest about it. I have never seen anybody so mad and so disappointed after a fight was over as they were at the sight of Kimbo and Houston Alexander with their hands on their knees, gasping for air like landed fish at the end of that fight. Like, it was just unbelievable. Like that is a thing that happened in the UFC. Like for all of the talk about fights like Joey Beltran and Hulse Gracie or some of the shade that was thrown at Tisha Torres and Angela Hill, that, my friends, that was the worst fight in modern UFC history. Anybody who tells you otherwise is lying to you.
Yeah, it's one of those, for all the talk about watered down UFC product and like CM Punk being, like 2009 and like the peak of MMA, we had Kimbo Slice fighting Houston Alexander.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean, like that's one of those things where like that's pure. I think that's like the absolute. And I really do derive joy from this. That's like the absolute pinnacle of Wikipedia analysis. Is looking at that and going, you know what? Houston Alexander's beat better dudes, and Kimbo's a joke. He's gonna win. And it's just like, why would you ever put a dime on Houston Alexander? Have you watched this man fight?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
even I at that point was not super into MMA. Even I knew that was a bad idea. Just saying. But so on that note, can we please move on before I lose more brain cells thinking about this?
I wanted fun statistical fact. Kimbo Slice on the receiving end of the only submission attempt by Matt Mitrione in the UFC. He was in a Matt Mitrione triangle. A triangle! Like, Matt Mitrione was playing guard against this man.
yeah.
And if I remember correctly, Kimbo's escape was to drive his thumbs into Mitrione's eyes.
That sounds right. So let's move on. We've got to move on. On that note, let's talk a little bit about Justin Lawrence, because he's actually an interesting prospect that Bellator has picked up and put on this card. And a guy that, I think could be argued the UFC. I think of it as like the classic case of why tough is terrible and you should never pay attention to it, is because it will totally derail people like him and build up a false sense of hype for somebody before they're ready, and then put them into fights that they're probably not going to win.
Yeah, I mean, Lawrence was a guy who got written off essentially after getting beaten on Tough and then getting beaten by Max Holloway in the second of his 3 UFC fights. He was 22 years old when the UFC cut him after he lost to Daniel Pineda. He was winning that fight against Max Holloway up until the point when he got dropped with a body shot and finished. Like, Justin Lawrence was a good prospect. He was super raw. He was super inexperienced, and so was Holloway. I mean, at that point, as you pointed out before he went on air, Zane. But but for a couple of different things, Justin Lawrence could have been a really elite kind of prospect. It didn't turn out that way. People forgot about him. When he went, he got his career back on track. He got 3 wins in RFA, and here he is. We talk about this all the time, but for a lot of guys, it takes time, and most fighters are not going to be, ready to compete with really elite fighters 3 years into their career. They're not. I mean, it's going to take 4, 5, 6 years for most guys to get to that point. Lawrence is a perfect example of that. He's still a good fighter. He's still got upside. He can still be a top 10 featherweight by the time everything's said and done.
Yeah, I mean, for the purposes of when Zane and I scout guys, I mean, he's still in the range where we would consider him to be if he was still outside the UFC, or if he had not fought in the UFC, we would be looking at him, I think, pretty seriously at this point, because he's done really well in his regional action, and I mean, he's only reaching the point now in an MMA career where he should be starting to kind of take that next step. And he took that next step, in 3 years ago? Barely, not even 3 years into his career. And he did pretty well, I mean, all things considered. Now that we know what kind of fighter Max Holloway is, I mean, I think looking back on that loss at UFC 150, it looks much better in retrospect than it did at the time. And then I think Pat already said it, that Daniel Pineda, that's exactly the kind of fight you look for a prospect to lose. So it's one of those things that I think Justin Lawrence, I mean, he went back to the regional circuit. He piled up some wins in the RFA. I'm still very excited to see him fight. I mean, I think he's a pretty good pickup for Bellator in terms of he's got some name value, and if he can kind of get things back on track, I think there will be some people who will kind of get back on the Justin Lawrence bandwagon.
Yeah, the interesting thing I think here, especially, is that that he got a Bellator and a UFC contract, and he went with Bellator rather than go back to the UFC, and especially for with all this Reebok stuff and all that, is that even a bad decision? What are the how long is it going to take for him to earn more money in the UFC than he would in Bellator?
Don't know. I mean, maybe there's nothing. He's still so young that he could fight out his Bellator contract and be on the receiving end of a legit deal from the UFC. I mean, I think that in large part what needs to happen here with situations like this is guys need to stop treating this as, oh, I'm going to be in one organization forever, and try to sign shorter contracts. Like we just saw Chad Mendes sign a long contract. We just saw Betch Kahea sign a long contract. Like I'm sorry, but like at some level you gotta stop signing these long ass deals and locking yourself in for periods of years. And you know what? Maybe if they don't want to sign those shorter contracts, then that says something about the structure of the sport, and maybe you need to get out. If you can't sign any sort of deal that's in any way favorable to you, then maybe you need to stop it. Maybe you need to get out of it. Like, I'm sorry, but like you have no leverage when you sign an 8-fight deal. And I would imagine Lawrence signed a deal for probably 3 or 4 fights with Bellator, and 3 or 4 fights, he's out in 2 years. He's still only 7 years into his professional career. He's got 3 or 4 years left of his prime. He could sign a substantial deal after that. Like,
yeah. I wonder how much of that is kind of crossover from, like, in most other sports where there are pretty clear regulations in terms of, like, you know, the contracts seem to be a little bit more balanced in the sense that, like, there are representation helping get athletes, like, a certain amount of guaranteed pay. And so signing a long-term deal in, say, American baseball is very good for the athlete because you basically, it's usually seen as a mistake by management to sign a guy for like an 8-10 year deal because, you know, they're going to get the money on the back end out of those contracts. In MMA, it's very much the opposite. It's a great move for management because they can cut you at any point and they don't owe you a dime.
yeah.
And it's a mistake for the athletes to really do anything but as like sign deals that would kind of come out to be 2 or 3 year deals.
Well, it's part of the reason that you don't see long contracts in the NFL.
Mhm.
Like, because the NFL can also cut you at any time, and fighters and NFL football players have mostly recognized if I'm going to, you know, I'll sign like a 2 or 3 or 4 year deal, and it'll pay me a lot in those early stages, and that's the way I want my contract to be structured, and that's why you see so much movement in the NFL too.
Yeah, you want when contracts are not guaranteed, you want short front-loaded deals, right? And instead, what we're getting in MMA are long back-loaded deals that don't these are terrible. These are terrible. You should not be signing contracts like this. It's nonsensical. The only way that you could get somebody under these circumstances to sign a contract like this is a situation where the fighters have absolutely zero leverage at all, or they act like they have zero leverage. They act like they have a lot less leverage than they actually do, but that's another issue.
Yeah, so I mean, and so like I say, you know, how long would it actually take for Lawrence to earn more in the UFC than Bellator? If they put him on like an 8-8 deal, earning $2,500 in sponsorship per fight, if he's got hustle, you know, maybe he's earning 5 or 10 grand per fight in sponsorship, along with whatever Bellator is paying him, and that's like you know, that seems like a minimum. Like there are fighters who earn less than 5, but I don't know. It seems like most of the guys don't, and it just seems to me like how, you know, at what point does, I guess the new UFC's baseline's 10-10, but still, I think there's a chance that more and more the UFC is not going to be paying people more right out of the gate than Bellator will.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty reasonable, and I think as time goes on, the sponsor pay issue is going to be. We're going to see how that plays out. We're going to see what sponsors are willing to pay Bellator guys, and as we get a baseline for that, yeah, there's a strong chance that the total compensation package there is going to come out better than it will for the UFC. And I mean, a lot of people might raise the issue of insurance at that point, but the UFC does not offer health insurance. They offer catastrophic coverage. That is not the same thing by any stretch of the imagination. And if you're a fighter, you're probably better off just buying your own health insurance to go along with that. Like I think it's important to recognize what the UFC is and is not offering here.
So on a last note, before we leave this Bellator card behind, Henry Corrales is a signing they got out of King of the Cage. He looks to be a pretty good athlete. He's maybe not technically developed, but just as an interesting note, I think it'll be interesting to see how well he does against Strauss, because he's almost certainly going to get stomped, but it's kind of a case of, like, is he competitively stomped, or is he just brutalized?
one of the things that everybody forgot about with the Scott Coker to Bellator honeymoon is what a bad job they did a lot of the time of booking newly signed fighters. Like you remember back in Strikeforce when they booked Marcos Rogerio de Lima, who was like a hot shit light heavyweight prospect, now fights in the UFC. They booked him against Fejao, or I'm sorry, they booked him against Mike Kyle in his first Strikeforce bout. Naturally, he got beaten. I mean, to a pretty uncompetitive and not entertaining decision. And suddenly, everybody forgot about Marcos Rogerio de Lima for like 3 years until he popped up on Tough Brazil again.
Yeah, it was Yoel Romero who had Fejao.
Yeah. Which like, same deal. You know, like this is part of the problem when you're running a thinner roster, as Bellator has now decided to do in the aftermath of the Rebney era, and as Strikeforce did for much of its for much of its time. Like. You don't. It's hard to build prospects the same way. It's hard to give them a good, steady progression up the ranks.
Yeah, I mean it's a different structure that I think Coker likes to run, which is that they kind of pick out who they want their stars to be, and then they develop other guys in a way of like, we're gonna feed you to those stars so the stars look good, and then we'll get you winnable fights to keep you looking like a legit talent. Like I think of, you know, it's like Derek Campos is like the prototypical Scott Coker project fighter. He's like their Scott Smith, where it's like
or Lyle Beerbaum. You remember him?
Yeah, or Lyle Beerbaum, where it's like he's gonna fight Tim Welch and Martin Stapleton, and then get beat by Patrick Fier, then go back and fight Esteban Payan, and then go back up and get beat by Michael Chandler. And it's just like they keep him looking legit by giving him these fights that are very winnable, very much fit him, and they keep him looking just legit enough that they can then feed him back up to their top tier talent they've picked out as their stars.
Yeah, and you just hope that under that model, those guys that you pick and choose to do that with are going to be fun, entertaining guys.
Yeah.
So that's basically the model, right? And that's why Strikeforce loved Scott Smith so much. It's why they loved Robbie Lawler. Back when he was, like, weird to think that now the UFC welterweight champion was kind of in that mold, but like they did that with Robbie Lawler for a long time. Like, you know, here's raw as hell Adlan Amagov, Robbie Lawler flying cup to the face, knocks him out, and then they gave him Tim Kennedy so he could get ground down in his next fight. Like, yeah, I mean that I think you're absolutely right, Zane. I think that's the model.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, and it'll be interesting to see how prospects develop under that, how well they do bringing guys up, and you know, if it's because I think the big thing they're doing is that they're really going after wrestlers, and they're trying to find the next star out of great wrestling talent that's moving into Bellator. So those are the guys that they're really working on. But even then, you know, we saw Bubba Jenkins. Like, throw him at Georgi Karkanyan, you know? Like, then comes right back to a fight that he's going to win, and then next time out, you know, if next time out he might get, like, another step up like that.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of those fights where, like, okay, so this may come off as weird, but I'm not a fan of Georgi Karkanyan, and I don't understand where they're going with him, and I have never really understood that. Where, like, he's not really a prospect anymore. He's basically in his prime. Like, what you see is what you get. Do they think he's super marketable? Because I don't. Like, I mean, so why would you like what do you think you're doing with that guy? You may get a good. You would probably be a good matchup with Pitbull. Like, that would be a fun fight. You could put him in fun fights at the top of the division, but he's not a long reigning champion. He's not super charismatic. He's not gonna sell a lot for you. He doesn't have a huge presence. Like, so I was always kind of puzzled at the Jenkins booking there, because like what are you trying to get out of that? Like, why sink a guy like Jenkins for the sake of building up Karkanyan?
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that people are going to start remembering as the Scott Coker era continues in Bellator, are the flaws that we saw in Strikeforce matchmaking are going to start to reassert themselves. Because I remember many, many discussions of what is Strikeforce doing in terms of, like, their title picture, and what are they doing in terms of matchmaking. Like, a lot of times you get, like, fights that don't end up really leading to anywhere. And I feel like Scott Coker's specialty with, like, the cotton candy fights, the ones that are like Like it's cotton candy. It's sweet and it's fun in the moment, but it has absolutely no value, like of anything. And I feel like that's kind of where it makes for an interesting place to grow prospects, because you get some guys who can break out of their tracks, like they're set a track. Like, you are our like feeder talent, and we're gonna build you up, and then we're gonna give you to the big guy, and then we'll, like what Zane just said, and then you get guys who kind of break out of that. Like, I've always been of two minds on like which one of those things Luke Rockhold was. Like, when he got Jacare, were they feeding him to Jacare, or did they expect that to be like a passing of the torch? Because I've never really, I've kind of like gone back and looked at it a couple times. I kind of feel like they thought they were feeding him to Jacare.
So I'll tell you why I don't think that was the case in that fight, and it's because Rockhold was an AKA guy, and Bob Cook, like, I don't know that this is like a super well-known thing, but Bob Cook was basically doing a lot of co-matchmaking before Strikeforce at that point. So when Bob Cook put Rockhold in that fight with Jacare, it was because they thought that that was a winnable fight for Rockhold. And so that would be my guess. But then you come across fights like Lorenz Larkin versus King Mo.
Yeah.
Or Derek Brunson versus Jacare. Brunson, who now it turns out is like a perfectly fine middleweight. Like, he's probably a top 15 middleweight. And so, but that was a feeding. That was one where we knew exactly what that was supposed to look like. You know, because I think the fight before that, Brunson had fought Lumumba Sayers. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
Or Lawler fighting Jacare was another feeding. That was another one where it was like, yeah, he might land a punch, but it's Robbie Lawler back when Robbie Lawler like didn't do anything but weightlift in between fights, and like there's no way he's not going to get submitted by Jacare.
Yeah, exactly. But okay, so we've spent a long time on Bellator. Do we want to hop over to some other stuff?
Yeah, let's hop over to this upcoming card here and talk about that, because there's a ton of talent on it, and we really have to go over it. So I don't know. There's so many places to start. It's almost hard to think about. Who are you guys most excited about?
Jędrzejczyk.
Pat, go now.
Oh, me? Oh, yeah, Jędrzejczyk.
Yeah.
Like, there's no other acceptable answer here, because despite the fact that she is the UFC Women's Strawweight Champion, she is still essentially a prospect. She's been fighting as a professional for a little more than 3 years. She's what? She's 25, 26.
Mm-hmm. She's 27, but
she's 27. Okay, yeah, she hasn't been fighting for very long. She's still pretty raw in a lot of ways, but she's absolutely destroying people. She's on the phenom track. Like, we've talked at great length before about the phenom track, and about how every other prospect suffers by comparison to these phenom types. Jędrzejczyk appears at first glance to belong on that track. You don't beat fighters like Claudia Gadelha and Carla Esparza, and also, I mean, even Rosie Sexton in like Jędrzejczyk's 5th professional fight, or Juliana Lima, who's super experienced and hard-nosed. Like, you don't beat fighters like that on your way up. There's no padding at all to Jędrzejczyk's record. She's beaten legit fighters from the time she in her infancy as a prospect, shall we say. She still hasn't even tapped into the full breadth of skills that we know she has, because, like, I don't know if you guys have watched her kickboxing fights at all. She's a really great kicker. Like, back when she was a kickboxer, she was a better kicker than she was a puncher. Through really beautiful, gorgeous, like, step across low kicks, really nice teeps, like really great left high kick, like just an awesome arsenal of kicks that we've barely seen her use in MMA, probably because she's afraid of being taken down. And as she gets more comfortable with her takedown defense and her spacing and all of that, she's only going to get better. Like, she is a legit elite future fighter, like a pound for pound kind of fighter.
Yeah. I think what you said, Pat, is about her is key, is the fact that she still is very much a raw talent in a lot of ways, that when you look at her, she still doesn't have that complete rounded skill set. Like, even in the Carla Esparza fight, she didn't look great grappling up against the cage, but it didn't matter because she was really good at keeping it off the cage. She's built herself a game that looks a lot like elite strikers, like over on the men's side. And I think that's a huge difference, is that, like, we're getting like we get a very particular game being played at like 115. It's a little bit different than like how some of the other weight classes kind of fight, because it's a little bit more grappling centric. I think we've talked about before that, like, everyone seems to have like certain takedowns in their arsenal, and they're not like the standard set of takedowns we kind of associate in MMA. The head and arm throw being one of them. And then Jędrzejczyk comes in and she plays like a very straightforward, like standard MMA metagame striker sort of path, and she's got the power and the technique to back up the striking, which nobody else has. And she's just really good at stopping takedowns in the middle of the cage, and she's really good at keeping her back off the fence, and she beats the snot out of people because of it.
See, I disagree with that. I think she's pretty awesome at stuffing takedowns with her back to the cage. Like, I think she's awesome at stuffing takedowns everywhere. Like, almost all of her takedown defense against Juliana Lima and a lot of it against Esparza was with her back to the cage. She struggled a little bit with Gadelha, but that's because Gadelha, despite not having the wrestling background that somebody like Esparza or Jessica Aguilar does, is probably the best pure takedown artist at 115. I mean, I think that like anybody is going to struggle to stuff Claudia Gadelha's takedowns.
And I don't think there are many girls at that weight that can do things against her takedown wise, but Gadelha's and Esparza's only takedowns against her came against the cage. Like, Esparza couldn't do anything to her in the center of the cage.
Well, yeah, I mean, but like when you attempt 10 takedowns, you're gonna eventually get one. Like,
yeah,
I mean, I don't know. But long story short, I mean, yeah, she is playing a game. You know what her game reminds me of is like Paul Felder. A little bit, with less kicking and with a lot less kicking and a lot more punching, but like same kind of thing in terms of good circular movement, good stalking movement, really, really excellent takedown defense, and most importantly, something we also saw out of Robbie Lawler in his second fight with Johnny Hendricks is the ability to hurt you while you're trying to take them down, right? Like, so it's not enough to just stuff the takedowns. You have to make them not want to shoot that takedown in the first place because they know if they do it, they're going to get hurt. It's operant conditioning. You know, you want to do the whole Pavlov's dog thing here. Like, make them think that the second they try and shoot on you, you're going to find some way to hurt them. Donald Cerrone does it with stepping knees in the pocket, right? But that's a really elite, high-level kind of game to play, and you see it too with the variety of punches that Jędrzejczyk throws and how she throws them. The pace that she works at is very much like where we're at in the metagame. She throws 15, 20, 25 strikes a minute, which is excellent output by any measure for any weight. That's a really high-level kind of game, and it's a game that literally nobody else in that weight class is even close to playing.
Yeah, there's nobody out there in either of the women's divisions, and then in fact I would say in any of women's MMA, except maybe like somebody like Alexa Grasso or Mizuki Inoue, who are playing that kind of game at all.
I still think Mizuki Inoue is just super overrated.
She is super overrated, but she's also like, you know, she's a high volume striker, even if she's overrated. Like, I don't know. I'm not saying that, you know, she is the shining example of the broken Japanese system of developing fighters.
Yes, this is true.
In that she shouldn't be overrated. She has a lot of legit skills, but she is super overrated because none of them fit together even a little.
Yeah, well, and she's also basically a child. Like, she's what, like 20 or 21, and she's been fed all of these ridiculously difficult matchups that would stunt an adult prospect at the same time, and when you give them to somebody who is not in any way close to her physical prime, yeah. But yeah, so I guess my pick for best prospect on the card is Jędrzejczyk. What else do you guys think? What else should we be looking for here?
Well, obviously there's Arnold Allen.
Mm-hmm.
We can't pass over Arnold Allen after all of the debate over whether or not he's the best featherweight prospect in the world.
At no point did I ever say he was the best featherweight prospect in the world. So thanks for drastically misrepresenting my point. But
you know what? I distinctly remember you holding up this picture of Arnold Allen with the heart around it, and
yeah. So I do think that Allen is a legit elite prospect. I think that he probably. Right now, he should probably be a bantamweight with an eye to moving up to featherweight at some point in the near future.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think it's just hilarious that you left Allen off of that top 10 featherweight list, and you included the immortal Mike Grundy, who just got triangle choked a couple of months ago, and you know, like,
Well,
Nicholas
Allen
Mota,
also got worked over by some Polish dude. You know, I mean,
I'm joking, but like, or Nicholas Mota, who got knocked off the fourth season of the Ultimate Fighter Brazil. Like, no, I mean, I think that Allen is a legit prospect. He's probably going to lose this fight and going to lose it pretty handily. I think it's a pretty shitty matchup for him. Like, Alan Omer has stuffed much better takedown artists and much better clinch takedown artists in the past than Arnold Allen. He's also way bigger, way stronger, a way better striker, a really outstanding athlete. I think this just plays out really poorly matchup-wise for Allen. But with that said, Allen is still a super promising prospect, and it's really good that he has made his way to the UFC here, because he should get a much more appropriate matchup his next time out.
yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if the message to him after this one is that he needs to seriously thinking about dropping a weight class, because at current he does not really cut any weight to make featherweight. He pretty much weighs in as is to make the weight. So, I mean, we know from long experience that doesn't really cut it in like high level MMA unless you're an absolute freak athlete. And I think Allen's got some things to be excited about. He's really technical in the clinch, and that is an invaluable skill at this level. And I think he could make use of that to ugly up this fight a little bit. But this is a tough match coming in. As to echo everything Pat said, this is a really tough fight for him to coming in. So we'll see how it plays out. But he got his foot in the door, and that's what matters right now, because the UFC is not signing people in huge droves right now, so you got to get in any way you can.
I just picked up a new Explode guy, though, so, you know, got to be happy there.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
I know. Especially at welterweight, where you know, geez, there's just nobody out there at welterweight who could take a fight on short notice except somebody who's spent their entire career in Explode.
Jesus, what a fucking joke, man. Like, what's the point even? Like, why would you ever bother to fight guys who don't just completely suck if they're just going to pick you up coming off of those Explode fights?
Yeah. He followed it. It's the exact. He came out of the same gym as Willie Gates, Millennia and MMA, and they followed the exact same path. They spent a bunch of time in Explode and Gladiator Challenge. Then they took one legit fight for another organization, and they won that fight, and now they got a UFC contract.
Mm.
And that's all it takes.
It's bullshit.
It is. Otherwise, we also got to talk Magomed Mustafaev, because he's one of our top welterweight prospects, and I'm excited about him coming in, especially fighting Piotr Hallman, who is tough as hell, but I honestly think Mustafaev can beat.
I think Mustafaev can beat him. I don't think that he will. I think this is a really, really tough matchup for a guy with Mustafaev's skill sets, because if Hallman has weaknesses in his game. Nobody is going to deny that. He's not a super awesome athlete. He's not a fantastic striker. Even he's really game and durable, and he's willing to engage. And he works at a really good pace. He throws a lot of volume, but he's not super powerful. Like, these are the kinds of things, when you put them together, that are really tough for a dude like Mustafaev to overcome, because Mustafaev does not throw much volume at range. In fact, he barely throws any at all. His game is almost entirely single shots, even if those are hard shots. His wrestling game, Mustafaev has a habit of shooting from too far away, and that's really hard. Hallman, again, not like a super awesome wrestler, but he's a good wrestler, and he's easily good enough to stuff poorly set up shots. Now, if it gets to the mat, Mustafaev should be able to handily out-grapple him. I think just the way that their particular games match up makes it really hard for Mustafaev to put himself in position to do that.
Yeah, I think. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I just think that Mustafaev, like, this might be one of those things where the dynamism just makes a huge difference, where Mustafaev is just like so much more dynamic and is so much quicker and able to get in and out of the pocket and to like force Hallman to work at odd angles. We could see something a lot like maybe the Yair Rodriguez fight. I don't know that Mustafaev is that level of athlete, but the same thing where like all of a sudden Charles Rosa just looks like the slowest, most awkward fighter in the face of the planet.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a really good point. I don't know. Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense because I'm thinking back now to like Abu Bakr Nurmagomedov is a good athlete and like he's like an Islam Makhachev type of athlete. So plus if not elite, and Mustafaev kind of ran circles around him. And we should expect Mustafaev after having spent this entire camp at ATT, didn't he?
Yep.
Yeah.
Like we should expect Mustafaev to look even better in that front. So yeah, that's a really good point. I hadn't really considered that a ton, but that makes a lot of sense. That kind of physical deficit may be able to make up for a kind of a skill gap there. Good point. Mustafaev's an interesting prospect. I'm not quite as high on him as you guys are, just because I don't quite see the skills in the same way. I don't see the well-roundedness or anything like that yet. But that's a really good call. That's a good point.
I'd also say that, yeah, he does have a tendency to shoot from too far outside, but Mustafaev's not really like a get you down on the first initial sort of thing. He really shines on chain wrestling, and I think that's something that to me was his like real standout skill when we looked at him, was his ability to transition through grips and takedowns once he get on it inside on a guy, and that's what I'm looking forward to see if it transitions to like an upper level of MMA. Because obviously the wrestling is at a fairly high level in the Russian circuit. So when you see a guy who's constantly taking people down with good technical wrestling, it means something. But I mean, you get a different level of athlete when you hit the upper levels, and so I'll be really interested to see if that transitions. I do agree, Pat, with you on his striking. He's got very much. I just have shorthanded it as combat sambo striking, where you just load up on single shots, because so many guys coming out of the combat sambo realm like have zero volume striking. They just every shot is a kill shot, and there's about 5 to 6 seconds in between each shot, like minimum. So I'm really interested to see how he looks getting in there. I'm really excited to see him get in there. Hallman, I think, is a good test for him. It's obviously a bit. They're fighting at welterweight, correct? That's the because
Lightweight.
Lightweight, yeah. So he dropped down. I mean, Hallman just got T-bowed, but he made a real fight out of the T-bowing. And if you can make T-bow work in the clinch, I mean, you're doing something right. So I'll be very interested to see what happens once these two kind of lock up, because Hallman has handled big, hulking Brazilian wrestlers before, and Trinaldo and T-bow. I'll be really interested to see what he makes of like a speedy little technical wrestler.
Okay, now we got a question. I got a question because I don't know. I want to figure something. I want to hear an opinion because I'm a little split. What's the more exciting fight, Lapilus Sasaki or Askam dos Santos?
They're both kind of sneaky, awesome fights.
They are. I love them both.
Yeah, this was one of those cards where like we're doing my preview of it. Like, there's no name value at all for any of these guys, but it's really well matched. Like, Sasaki Lapilus it should be fun because like Lapilus should have an advantage at range, like a pretty strong advantage at range over Sasaki. But the second that it hits the mat, like Lapilus is really athletic and he's a good scrambler, and I think that's where Sasaki beats him, right? I think Sasaki at some point manages to drag him to the ground. They get into a scramble. Sasaki latches up some kind of choke or takes his back or what have you. But I think that up until that happens, it's going to be super fun and high paced, and so that's probably my pick. Askam dos Santos, just because they're bigger, I think is going to be slower paced, but still fun.
I really like. I mean, Dos Santos and Lapilus are two guys that I really found myself really enjoying their games a lot the more I watched them. Especially Lapilus in his debut really showed that he has some tricky striking more than just like being athletic and putting together regular combos. Like, he actually does set up his strikes well.
I'm 99% sure he's got a Dutch coach because of the way that he puts things together and the balance that he gets on his combinations, and like it's a really kind of clean Dutch style game, and I enjoy it a lot. It works well for him. He's also made really, really fast improvements in it, and you have to like that, like especially in comparison to his brother, who's a better athlete, Damian Lapilus is a hell of a physical specimen, like a hell of an athlete. But Damian has, despite having fought for quite a while, has never really put things together. Like Joe Duffy kind of took him apart and on the feet. So it's nice to see Taylor making those kinds of improvements and getting, and as you would expect, growing into his body, getting bigger. He's faster. He's a better athlete than he was. Like he's a fun prospect. He's a fun fighter. Good pickup for the UFC. Kind of a sneaky, under the radar kind of guy.
And Antonio Dos Santos is another one who, like, I think I remember when they signed him, and I was gonna go watch tape on him, and I was like, okay, just another random Brazilian off the circuit, whatever. But I actually really like his game. I mean, he's kind of like in that, you know, not obviously a much different physique, so much different emphasis, but sort of in that Alex Cowboy mold of like a really aggressive Muay Thai striker with good takedown defense and like, you know, slick, just kind of much better rounded than much more well-rounded than I expected.
Mm-hmm. Well, he packs a hell of a punch, man.
Yeah.
He's a real puncher, and he throws combinations.
Yep.
Like this is the huge thing. I mean, like, you know, it's so frustrating watching tape and seeing guy after guy after guy who at the most puts 1 or 2 strikes together at a time. Antonio Dos Santos will throw 3, 4, 5, 6 punches at a time, and he does that consistently. It's not like he throws one combination and then takes 30 seconds off. He'll throw a combination, then he'll throw another combination, and then another combination. And even if it's just a 1-2, like, it's like, oh my God, you've put multiple strikes together in the same sequence. Thank God. Like, though, and also, I mean, I love the end to his last fight just from a pure chaos perspective because he's a good chill dog. Like, just no, 1 second, I got to fix my broken finger. Like, what's the call timeout, man? Like, that's not how that works. But I actually really enjoy him. I enjoy Askham too. I think Askham can be a good fighter. He kind of ran into a guy that was a bad matchup for him, like a technical, if not terribly athletic, top position grinder. Like, that's the worst case scenario matchup for somebody like Askham at this point in his career. I think this should be a hell of a lot of fun. If it stays mostly at range, I think Dos Santos wins. If Askham can force it into the clinch, I think his height advantage and leverage advantage should give him the win. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I'm really looking at. I think the whole thing for me will be if Askham can outlast Dos Santos. You know, because Askham's such like a great late fight finisher. He's the kind of guy who wears you down, and then the third round suddenly he starts pouring it on, and you're like, oh my God, why weren't you fighting like this 10 minutes earlier? It's because he gets his opponent so tired that they finally can't stop anything he does. So I mean, I think it's gonna be a classic one of those win early or lose early or win late fights for Askham.
Yeah.
I kind of expect Askham to survive the storm and drag this into deep water. And then I think towards the end this looks like your classic, like, not top 8 middleweight fight where, like, both guys look heavyweight exhausted at some point. So I think Askham pulls this one out.
Askham's pretty much known for his cardio, though.
Yeah. No. I agree. I just somehow middleweights always, like, if they're not like top 10 middleweights, it always ends up like they manage to find a way to get like heavyweight tired.
Well, that division is full of the most mediocre prospects on the face of the earth. I mean, that's what that's about. It's full of C-grade athletes with C-grade technique. Like, there are maybe 5 middleweights that you could point at and be like, that guy's a good guy on the rise. Everybody else is like, wow, that guy's stagnated horribly in ways that I wouldn't have expected. So, yeah, I think that's why. That division is just strange. Askham and Dos Santos are both guys that I would actually point to as being pretty interesting developing fighters. So.
Mm-hmm.
We could talk about Backstrom and Lahat. I mean, they're both kind of prospects in need of a jump start to their career. Lahat got one last time out. Was that Steven Seiler that he fought?
Yep. Yeah.
Which is a great building block fight for a prospect, but Backstrom really needs that right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, yeah, Backstrom, like, I enjoyed that choke win he got his last time out, where he landed that awesome knee, and then I forget who he was fighting, grabbed like
Ninamaki.
Nimaki like just latched onto him like just out of pure instinct and ended up in a pretty awesome bulldog, no hooks, rear naked choke sort of situation. And like that was really cool, but I really don't like Backstrom's striking game at all. He kind of stands on the outside and just throws like kicks with like absolutely no setup, and he gets hit a lot once guys start timing the kicks. And he doesn't like he's a good grappler, but he has like no process for closing distance. He like stands on the outside and like flicks kicks at you, and then like kind of relies on the other person coming forward.
Well, he's a really good kicker with a high output kicking game, but A, that's hard to maintain a high output kicking game.
Yeah.
And B, he doesn't have hands. Like he
No.
basically has no hands.
No hand. There's no threat. Like there's no. You don't feel in danger coming forward. He doesn't take his head offline. He doesn't guard his head at all. I mean, he's just like a stationary target. I mean, that was what was his first loss. He got absolutely blasted when a guy caught his kick. I forget who it was.
Mike Wilkinson.
Yeah, but for Lahat, really good athlete, great takedown game, a good grappler. Put it on the books that they'll call him a jiu-jitsu world champion, despite the fact that he like won a brown belt world championship in like no-gi. But they'll just be like, oh, jiu-jitsu world champion. But you know, I like Lahat's game. It's just that he's reasonably well rounded with good athleticism. So I kind of feel like Lahat's kind of moving forward as the more interesting guy.
I think you're reading a lot into a guy who got caught right on the chin with one punch. Like I think that's a lot of criticism to level at him, especially considering that was the first strike that Wilkinson landed on the feet in that entire fight. Like Backstrom is a really, really good athlete, and really, really good athletes tend to think that they can get away with a lot, and up until the point where they don't. Like we tend to see this more on the mat than we do on the feet. But how many times have we talked about the classic prospect submission loss where they walk themselves into a choke and a scramble or what have you? Like, I mean, Junior Dos Santos did it in like his 8th pro fight. Like this happens all the time. It can happen on the feet too, where you have a guy who thinks he's so much longer and so much faster, which Backstrom is. Backstrom is way faster and way longer, and frankly has good footwork. Like he does get in and out on angles. Like the one time that Wilkinson managed to move in, Backstrom had his hands down by his sides, and Wilkinson caught him with a perfect punch. Like a punch that Wilkinson, like there was no reason to expect Mike Wilkinson to be able to throw a punch like that based on what was available at that point. Like so, I don't know. I think that's a lot of criticism to lay on him. Whereas Lahat, I don't think he's a good athlete. I don't think he's more of a relentless than a particularly technical wrestler. Like he's got some chops on the mat, but I think if this spends a lot of time on the ground, Lahat's getting choked out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm honestly picking Backstrom to win this. I didn't want to say that like I don't think that I have criticism of Backstrom just that like, and I saw this when he was coming up regionally, that he has absolute confidence in his striking, and he only strikes in one dimension, and that's eventually this loss was going to come. Like he's not a puncher at all. He's just
but think about what is he actually trying to do with his striking?
Yeah, he's trying to keep guys at range so that they force themselves to come in aggressively, and then he can counter with his wrestling and grappling and tie them up, and
so he can dive into the clinch, right?
Yeah.
Like he either wants to be all the way out or all the way in, and it would behoove him to develop some punching skills to be able to compete in that kind of middle range. But it's not like this is an illogical way to fight for him. Like
no, it's a classic. It's a classic. What I call like the kicker grappler. It's a very classic MMA skill set. I mean, up the card, Peter Sabota does the exact same thing. Even like it's Amirkhani, Makwan Amirkhani does the same thing. It's a really prototypical MMA style. So I don't think it's a problem so much. It's just that how confident Backstrom is in his striking, and he's very confident in it for how one-dimensional it is. It was not surprising that he got knocked out like that at some point. I do hope he learns from it, but I do think that Lahat's going to try and grapple him, and that is probably going to lose him the fight.
Yeah, I don't see that going particularly well for Lahat, because I said the same thing about Ninamaki, another grappler type who loves to scramble, which Lahat does. You're going to end up chances of you out scrambling Backstrom are not super high.
No. I don't know. It's a fight I like for Backstrom, but it is an interesting fight. Because Lahat is, he's the classic sort of well-rounded, not particularly great at anything, but good at enough at everything to win fights. Like I say, his fight against Steven Seiler, that's the perfect bounce back fight, because it's the beta version of Noah Lahat. You know? Other than that, let's see, is there anyone else we're really missing here? I'm sure there is. Makwan Amirkhani, I mean, he's going to be fighting. He's just about coming in at the 5-year mark. I have to say, I don't think he's a great prospect, but I hope he really makes a run.
Yeah.
Amirkhani is probably the best port of Chael Sonnen I've seen since, the most similar. People like to pin that label on people like Conor McGregor or anybody who talks a good game kind of thing. But Amirkhani is legitimately, the closest I can think of. It's somebody who's a very good wrestler, who has a great personality, and who's otherwise incredibly limited and puts himself in the kind of bad situations that will lose him fights.
He is. I think his primary attribute that makes him valuable to the UFC is that he's fun. He goes in and he's fun to watch. He's great on the mic afterwards. Even if Joe Rogan is trying his hardest to derail everything about it, he's still an intriguing interview. And he can legitimately beat a good number of fighters inside the UFC. But I don't think he's title material, though I really will be just like you, I'll be rooting for him to make a run at it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the flying knee has led to a little bit of confusion about what it is that Makwan Amirkhani actually does as a fighter. That is not his game at all. He is not a striker. He's a big, strong, aggressive wrestle grappler. And more emphasis on the grapple part than the wrestle part. He's not a fantastic takedown artist. To the extent that, I was pretty convinced that Andy Ogle was going to beat him in that fight. And I think that if it had gone on longer than 8 seconds, had there been no flying knee, I would actually make that pick again today based on what we know now. But to that point, I think this matchup just sets up absolutely perfectly for Amirkhani, right? A guy off of Tough Mexico who doesn't wrestle well, who doesn't grapple well. This is supposed to be a kind of a showcase first-round submission win for Amirkhani.
And I do think the thing that I missed about Amirkhani coming up that we saw a flash of in that fight, because he has a very problematic, his wrestling game is very problematic for somebody who grew up wrestling and was a national team wrestler in Finland. It's a very pick you up, slam you hard, lose position, then scramble for grappling. And if you stuff his wrestling at all, he immediately will dive on a heel hook.
Yeah.
But he is a potential top 10, top 15 level athlete. He's a great, phenomenal athlete with very large technical gaps in his game.
Yeah, which is not unexpected with a lot of guys who come out of that part of the world. That's pretty common with especially I think guys who come out of the Finnish scene. You see a lot of guys. It's that same kind of disconnectedness and worth less than the sum of its parts kind of approach for whatever reason. But I'm excited for this. It should be a showcase. He should choke this dude out. He should do it in entertaining fashion. He's probably going to slam him first. It's perfect. That's exactly what I want out of Mr. Finland. From where
it is. All right, so let's take a look back at last week just briefly before we kind of wrap things up. Most impressive what was the most impressive prospect performance? Probably Yair Rodriguez, frankly. I mean, he lost the third round in a way that I like to think of as a pump the brakes moment for everybody, comparing him to John Jones and Anthony Pettis combined.
What was that? Okay, what things that we learned in this fight? Yair Rodriguez is a much better prospect than I think he was made out to be. He's an awesome athlete. He's got a fun kicking game. But, like, what the fuck was Joe Rogan talking about with like, that switch kick thing? Like, we've seen guys do that in MMA for the last 10 years. Shogun did it repeatedly back in 2005. Lyoto Machida used to throw them all the time. John Jones throws them fairly regularly. This is not some, like, new technical innovation. This is a part of just about every heavy kicker's offense and has been forever in MMA.
Now, it just like I got into it with people like immediately because people are like, oh man, like yeah, like Yair Rodriguez, he looks like John Jones. Like John Jones wasn't splitting cards with a dude like Charles Rosa, like he wasn't. He was going in there and taking his lunch money, like, and getting out of there in like under a round. Now, like Yair Rodriguez, I'd probably compare him to be like a more athletic, like Alex Caceres or like Goffredo Pepe. Like a guy, like a really exciting, fun fighter off of Tough who plays like a hyper-aggressive game. But it's gonna he's gonna have to change that style, or it's gonna come back to bite him in the at some point.
Yeah, like let's say here's a parallel for you, right? Like if he had fought Thiago Tavares in this fight, Tavares would have ground him out for 3 rounds. Like most likely, that would be the likely outcome of that fight. And a guy who plays Rodriguez's kind of style is going to have to make those gross, because when you get into the elite of that division, Charles Rosa is one of the few guys who doesn't play that kind of heavy technical top game. When you start talking about the better fighters there, like Dennis Seaver could comfortably beat Yair Rodriguez right now for exactly that reason, right? Like that would be my read on it. Like pump the brakes a little bit. Like he's a really good prospect, and we should be excited. But he should also get like somebody equivalent to Charles Rosa in his next fight.
Yeah, I mean the thing we learned is that he's a top 5 level athlete at a big camp, and that's the exciting thing. Is a really super athlete at a big camp. Those together, given enough time, should make him an elite level fighter. If he doesn't derail himself somehow, that's the mashup you want. Elite athlete, top camp, go forth and prosper.
Just give it 2 years. You're gonna need 2 years before he's ready for top competition.
And if he's not coming in with a Taekwondo background, that's not coming in with a Greco and freestyle wrestling background. It is not coming in with the Sambo background. It is not coming in even with the Jiu-Jitsu background. It is coming in basically as an MMA neophyte.
Yeah.
And with a sense of distance and timing.
That
is what you have.
That also should be mentioned at some point, that like his wrestling in spurts, like it looked good at times. There were other times when Rosa got in on a shot and you could see that Rodriguez's hips were just like, he did not have the responses that you want when like a guy gets in deep on a double. He was basically getting picked up and dropped on his ass.
Yeah, I mean he's a young fighter without, like I say, he's an MMA native basically. Like you're basically looking at somebody who's learning all the game at once.
Yeah.
And those people are going to take longer. Like that's going to probably take him. It could take him 5 or 7 years to get all the way there from his starting point. But he's already a little ways in. I think that's kind of one of the weird things too, is that for somebody who only has 6 fights on his record, he started fighting in 2011. So it's taken him a while to get those first 6 fights.
Yep. But he's young. Ton of potential.
Otherwise, I think, Henry Cejudo looked as good as I hoped he would look. I mean, I put it this way. I think a lot of people watched that fight and were like, oh, Henry Cejudo, not that special. Everybody, see, we all knew. And it's like a fighter 3 years in beat a very good athlete and technical striker in his prime in a fight where none of his tools were working. Like, none of what Cejudo does well was working, and he still went out and won that fight. That's huge to me.
Yeah. No, this was a fight, I think, it's both for Cejudo, I think it's a confidence booster because of what you just said. Like, you got in there, and he kind of had that moment where you saw him, like Pat always said, but you saw that MMA prospect moment where he kind of ran out of ideas of what to do, and he still managed to pull out the win against a really experienced, well-versed fighter. And it's going to be good for him because I think the people are gonna back off him a little bit, and like this like huge excitement, and he's not gonna get rushed into a title shot, which is also going to be very beneficial for him because there is still work for him to do.
I mean, this was one of those things where coming into it, I could not believe the odds were as wide as they were. I mean, like Cejudo won. He clearly took 2 rounds, but it would not have taken very much for one of those 2 rounds to have gone against him.
Yeah.
And I didn't think that was going to happen, but like that was a live possibility here because Chico Camus is a good fighter. Chico Camus is a hell of a lot better fighter than Chris Carriazo is. He's way better than Carriazo is. He is a plus athlete. He's one of the better athletes in the division. He plays the kind of in-and-out range striking game that's really hard for an inexperienced guy who, no matter how fast Cejudo is, no matter how good his instincts are for putting combinations together, like it's still hard to play that kind of game against a really tricky striker like Camus is to make that work. A guy who is willing to stand in the pocket and pick his moment to throw and then exit on an angle. That's hard for an inexperienced guy to deal with. Like, much easier to deal with kind of a flat-footed Muay Thai like guy who likes to throw kicks like throw powerful body kicks like Chris Carriazo. That's an easier game for an inexperienced guy to deal with. There's not a whole lot of troopery happening there. But I thought this was as good as anybody could have hoped Cejudo would look in a winning effort. Like this was and I think it's a good point, Tom. Like we got to take a step back here. Cejudo needs maybe 2 more fights before you could put him in and expect a competitive fight with Demetrius Johnson. Because if Chico Camus could do this to Henry Cejudo right now, what is Demetrius Johnson, who is an absolutely elite, outstanding athlete with a lot more tools to draw on? Like I don't think it's a stretch to think that Demetrius Johnson finishes that version of Henry Cejudo.
Oh yeah, sure. Why wouldn't he? I mean, Demetrius Johnson is the very elite at a much further along point in development. There's no reason that Demetrius Johnson shouldn't finish Henry Cejudo right now, even as good as Cejudo could be and will be.
Yeah, but there's something to be said for these really, really elite kind of prospects and elite athletes who just find a way. Yep. You know, like even in these rough, like not fun, grinding shit fights, they find a way. Like McGregor Holloway, you know, is a good example of that. Blows his knee out, so he just starts shooting effortless blast doubles to take him down. So Cejudo's takedowns aren't working, his striking isn't working, so what's he do? He starts grabbing a single, immediately letting go, and then just pummeling Camus with a combination afterwards. Like guys like that who have that kind of drive to win, and if you win a gold medal in freestyle, you have that kind of will to win. They can find a way, and Cejudo did, to his credit. Like it speaks really well for his long-term prospects.
Yeah, I mean it's like the Weidman over Maia win. It's it's the wins that you see great fighters get that you forget about. Like you totally forgot that they ever even beat that guy. It becomes like this little footnote, or you remember that they beat them, and you're like, oh wow, he beat him. That's awesome. It shows how great he is. And it's just like, it may have been a terrible, ugly fight, but your real top championship level fighters, they just don't lose the ugly fight that's not going their way.
Yeah, like you remember, like GSP Parisian to a lesser extent, like a super tough, grinding fight with a ton of scrambles against a guy who was at that point probably a more technical grappler and wrestler. Like, and GSP managed to find a way, and he looked convincing doing it too. Like. Yeah. And there was no doubt when this went to the cards that Cejudo was going to win it.
Yeah, and I mean you could even say that GSP Johnny Hendricks, like that is the perennial ugly fight that he is losing by all stretches. Like that is not the fight he wants at all, and he still found a way to win it, to just get the fight over with, get the win, and move on. And like that's something that. That's like your real elite championship level fighters. They just don't lose.
It's true.
Yeah.
Anything else we need to go over from this card? Anybody else who jumped out at you?
Kelvin Gastelum didn't look any better or different, and still looked like he has the same problems that he did at welterweight.
Yeah, and let's be and his punishment fight for going up, like to send him up to 185, they make him fight a dude who's basically the smallest middleweight they have. And
Well, it wasn't so much a punishment. It was supposed to be like an encouragement fight, I think, almost. Like a go up there, get a win, feel good about yourself, and then we'll get you back down at 170. And instead, he just came in out of shape and beat the guy he was going to beat anyway, and nobody was impressed or thought he looked any better.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this like he is well on the way to pissing this away. It's
Yeah.
amazing. Like for a guy with that much talent, who I mean, you know, the way to do this, if you were Kelvin Gastelum, was to get on a fucking diet, come in ripped, only have to cut 5 or 6 pounds maybe to make 185, and look like, yeah, okay, with a water cut, I could easily make 170. You all were fools for doubting me. Instead, it looked like he was still about 205 or 210 pounds, and you just thought, well, I just don't need to diet for this. I can still just cut all the water.
Yeah.
Like, because he still didn't look good on the scale.
No.
At the weigh-ins. I mean, that's unbelievable, man. Like,
Yeah.
like, do not fuck this up.
Yeah, it was a holding pattern for everybody worried about his career.
yeah.
It was not an improvement. It was not a drastic step back. It was just like, well, we're still just as worried as we were. You have not shown anything different.
I mean, contrast that with Cejudo, who,
Yeah.
to this point, in the 3 fights that he has managed to get into in the UFC, has pulled it together. He's
Yep.
made improvements that we all knew that he needed to make. He's come in shape. He hasn't looked drawn out. He hasn't looked drawn out at the weigh-ins. Like, that's getting your shit together. Like, what Gastelum has done to this point, as much as we all love him as a fighter, and I think we do, right? Like, you all see the potential there. He's a potential champion. Like, he just is not doing the kind of, like, you don't just roll out of bed and do that. You've got to do the little things. You've got to do the weight cut right. You've got to do your diet right. You've got to do your strength and conditioning. You've got to, like, all of this stuff you have to do. These are not optional things if you want to be an elite athlete in any sport.
Yeah, and I think that really gets to the heart too of what we were talking about with Cejudo last week before the fight with the mentality thing and like, you know, how do you respond and how do you mentally, you know, get yourself going? And I think that for Gastelum it's just like nobody knows what gets him going. There's no easy answer of like maybe it's continually being in camps. That could have been the answer so that he did really well on Tough when he was just constantly on a grind.
Mm-hmm.
But for Cejudo, it was like, well, when people are doubting you and don't think you're good enough, that's when he's going to respond and get out and try and prove everybody wrong constantly. And we're seeing somebody who takes his career totally seriously, who did not look even, you know, a little bit gassed out fighting at a huge elevation in a fight on a fight card where everybody was looking gassed out.
Yeah, and to your point, to your point from last week, I think you're absolutely right. I'm now totally sold that you're right. Like the problems with Cejudo come when he thinks he's made it, not when he thinks he still has room to make up. I think you're absolutely stone correct about that.
It seems to make sense to me but with Gastelum, he has, you know, all the doubters are there, all that kind of motivation is there behind him. But you don't see that crazy mentality that, you know, the Michael Jordan mentality classically of like, you know, talking about how everybody doubted him in college when he's getting his Hall of Fame, like giving his Hall of Fame speech, and he's still talking about like the haters from his college days who didn't draft him first.
Yeah, he remembers that. Like, I don't know that it matters to Kelvin Gastelum that there are people talking shit about him.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same thing I remember hearing with, like, Albert Pujols, too, where, like, every interview he'd talk about how, like, pissed he was that people were doubting his age when he got drafted into baseball.
Yeah, like, you've got to have a borderline delusional sense of self-importance to do this.
Yeah.
And, like, a desire to completely reconcile your own self-image, your own high opinion of yourself, to make everybody else feel exactly that same way about you. And yeah, I don't know. Like, this is armchair psychologizing from us here, but I don't know. I mean, I think there's something to that. Call me crazy.
Yeah.
I think that, you know, people obviously can be great without that mentality, but you see that mentality consistently out of a lot of the athletes that people consider to be like the best of all time. They were just pathologically felt looked over and passed over, and that everybody was always doubting them and everybody was always out to get them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's about right.
And Yeah, it takes like to just keep yourself on that. You need some weird, like I mean, like and most of them, if you like really get into it, like a lot of athletes will admit that they have ways to like trick themselves into thinking things that
Hmm.
they understand, like some on some level they understand that like it's not actually out there. Like I had a teammate at Ohio State who like would talk about how when he was not like properly fired up for a match, he would like literally just sit there for like a couple seconds, close his eyes, and think about his opponent murdering his entire family. And that was what he did to like, and then he would go out and like break the person. But like that was like like that's like, and this is a guy like coming out of Israel who was like in their elite athlete track, and like I don't think he ever lost. I think he like it took him like he lost to an American maybe once in his entire career, and like just like would work himself up into these like situations where he could get legitimately angry about something. And I think those like little mental tricks are like part of like what makes like weirdly like athletes like elite.
It's true. It's I mean, it's why we get people like John Jones, where everybody's like, "Oh, he's such an asshole." It's like, yeah, well, I mean, there's a reason he's also the best fighter out there in the history of the sport.
Well,
So, all right. On that note, I think we got to shut this one down. Thank you guys for joining me, and we'll be back next week to talk about the fallout from this card and this rapidly changing fight night Machida Romero fiasco.
fuck, man.
So yeah, and a new explode fighter in the UFC, because God knows that you just can't go. All right. On that note, adios, everyone. You can find me on Twitter at Zane Simon, Pat on Twitter at Patrick_Wyman, Tom on Twitter at TP_Grant. You can find Tom and I on Bloody Elbow. Find Pat over on Sherdog. Give this video a like. Subscribe to MMANation.com and tune in next week.